Hello, I'm Mario Cordero, Chief Executive Officer of the Port of Long Beach, and I'd like to welcome you to another installment of Port Update. Today, my guest is Peter Friedmann, the founder and executive director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition. Peter has been with AgTC for 37 years and counting, helping those in the U.S. agriculture industry to navigate challenges and find success in international trade. He's known as a tireless and consistent advocate for his members. This is an interesting time for those who produce and ship agricultural goods, but he's accustomed to doing the work that matters. He also works with the Coalition of New England Companies for Trade, otherwise known as Connect, and Pacific Coast Council of Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders. Before all that, Peter was counsel for the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce and Science and Transportation. There, he was responsible for drafting the Ocean Shipping Act. He never left Capitol Hill. And of course, as he has spent much of his career representing shippers and international trade interests before Congress, the Federal Maritime Commission, and other federal agencies, his work has also contributed to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. It's always good to see you, Peter, and thank you again for accepting the kind invitation to be here. So let's get to the crux of the questions here. The administration now has moved forward with tariffs, particularly aimed at Canada, Mexico, and China, which accounts to over 50% of our trade partnership, at least in the scope of the USA. How is this going to impact our agricultural growers and your members?
Well, I'm glad to talk about that here because the primary gateway for U.S. agriculture exports has been the Southern California Port Complex. Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. This is the place where there's more agriculture going out of this country. And because you've got all the import cargo, you've got the containers here. So, it's highly appropriate that we're talking about it here. This is a very challenging time. First of all, we recall that there were tariffs imposed back 7 years ago against China. And China retaliated. Mm-hmm. And during that retaliation, inflicted a lot of injury on U.S. agriculture exports, to the extent that the Trump administration then had to generate billions of dollars of price support and other subsidies to help U.S. Farmers survive the loss of cargo. Because we have competition, global competition. Now, for imports, if you have a 12-year-old boy or girl and they want an athletic shoe, a running shoe, they care. Does it have a swoosh on it? Does it have 3 stripes? And by God, they want that. Try giving your kid some other thing that's not the brand they want that's popular at school that year. And you'll have to pay a little more for it if there's other costs of transportation. But for our agriculture exports, those hogs in China that eat the soybeans, they don't give a darn if it's coming from Minnesota or North Dakota or Brazil or Argentina or wherever. The hogs don't care. Mm-hmm. So we have that competition for everything. The Chinese consumers, and China is the biggest market for our agriculture exports, although we have Asia Pacific is our biggest region, which is a reason why Port of Long Beach is sitting in a great location, because you're the closest one to the biggest market for our ag exports. What we have in Asia Pacific now is a history. They remember what happened 6 years ago. They are worried that we're going to have more tariffs. And sure enough, their worry was justified, as announced just yesterday. Additional tariffs. Now we're at 20% tariffs imposed on China, and China is imposing 25% on our exports. Just last night, initiated new ones. But the difference is that China has learned over the last 6 years, they better diversify their sourcing. So even before this, Brazil has come in and taken a lot of market share. I guess if you cut down enough rainforest, you got enough places to graze more cattle, but that's what's happening. Cattle coming out of Brazil in volume and in quality has grown dramatically. Hogs, pork, much greater than before. So China was very clever in its tariffs this time. They have selected products where they have alternative sources.
Right.
Cotton, pork, beef, soybeans, all being hit by massive tariffs just last night. So we're very concerned for agriculture because this becomes not just a temporary short-term thing, but can continue for a long time. And that's why we are up in arms. That's why the senators from those states where those products are grown in the United States, typically seen as red states, but that's where the products are grown, are also up in arms and weighing in with the White House right now.
So as you mentioned, we've been living in a tariff environment now for a few years. But of course now we have an amplification of this tariff policy. So are your members feeling the effect of the latest tariff implementation? And if not, when do you think they're going to really feel that effect?
The latest one, absolutely. Great and very timely, Mario, that you asked the question right now. The latest announcement was yesterday by China on various products. They have, most of them, the tariffs would be effective March 10. But for some products, for example, logs, and logs move in significant numbers in container. Most people don't think of logs moving in container, but many, many containers, thousands of containers leave the United States with logs. They announced that yesterday, about midnight our time, and they made it effective about midnight our time. We have members who, because we're agriculture and forest products, paper, logs, and so forth, as well as all your traditional agriculture, vegetables, beef, pork, nuts, all those things. They announced that last night. We have a member who is in the process of a ship being loaded with containers of logs, and logs being loaded into containers to go onto that ship, that this morning was on the phone with me saying, oh my God, we don't have anything to do with our logs now or the containers with logs because we're partially loaded on the ship, but China's announced they're not accepting it, effective immediately. So you talk about the impact. I mean, it's one thing to have only 10 days to prepare, which is almost impossible, but that is something else. China's done something also very different this time, and that's why your question right now is very timely. Typically, China and the US, when you announce surcharges or tariffs or restrictions or suspensions, it applies to the whole industry, the whole commodity. That's what we've been talking about, say pork and beef. On soybeans, they announced that. Guess what? They also picked 3 companies, and they said, first of all, we got tariffs on soybeans, March 10, it's going to come. But for 3 companies, your soybeans leaving the United States, you're suspended immediately. And they were suspended at midnight last night, 3 companies. Now, they're 3 of the largest companies in the world, as certainly in the U.S. agriculture. But those 3 companies, their soybeans were suspended immediately. That's a completely different play. We haven't seen countries suspend the import from specific companies. We haven't done it. Mexico hasn't done it. Canada hasn't done it. China's doing it now. So this is uncharted waters. Uncharted waters.
Well, talking about uncharted waters, also on a parallel approach, on a parallel path, we have now heard about the proposed tax or penalty on vessels that are made in China. How is that going to impact the American agricultural exporter?
Well, again, very, very astute, because many people are focused on the first part of that U.S. Trade Representative's proposal. By the way, developed over the last 2.5 years but delivered to President Trump 4 days before he took the oath. There may have been a political incentive of greeting him with that, but nonetheless, he went ahead and let USTR proceed with this thing, so it's his to deal with. The first part of that is to impose a penalty, maybe $1 to $1.5 million, on any Chinese-built ship. And as you know, China is building the majority of ships now in the world, right. Or Chinese-owned ship. So you've got some carriers, a Chinese carrier owns the Chinese containers, and they're going to be hit by $1.5 million fee. But there's a second part to this thing. For our exports, there's a mandate that a certain percentage be moved on U.S.-built ships and U.S. flag ships, not necessarily built here, but U.S. flag. One small problem with this, we don't have any. We don't have any that could go internationally. We have, I think the largest U.S.-built ship is about 3,000 containers. You know here, certainly that's, minimal, if not laughable, for any major container port, certainly Long Beach and LA, which are primary gateways for our agriculture exports. But at any port, any of the smaller ports, you have bigger ships than that. Economically, you need to spread the costs, and especially for agriculture, which is a low margin product. You can't just send a ship across the ocean with a couple thousand containers. You need to have more. You're going to have to big volumes. So we don't have any of those. We don't even have shipyards capable of building those ships. And we certainly, we have the Jones Act ships, and you actually have, in Long Beach here, you have Jones Act service to Hawaii, for sure. But that's a niche, right? So that's the problem. I mean, that's going off the cliff. That would mean for those agriculture exports that might have to be exported, and they have a percentage of, I think about 15% in 7 years will have to go on these U.S.-built, U.S.-owned ships. They're just not going to move.
Well, just to add some context to what you're saying, Peter, as you've referenced, at the Port of Long Beach, we have two terminals, Matson and Pasha, both Jones Act vessels go to and from Hawaii. And you referenced the 3,500 vessel, which we built only a few in the last couple of years. And my understanding is the cost of those vessels, 3,000 plus, I call it 3.5 TEU, is about $250 million. If built in the USA. That same vessel built in China is 50. So it is concerning in terms of how we get to the ultimate objective of what we hope to kind of turn around here in the USA, but it certainly seems problematic at the very least. So let me ask you, how are your members now preparing for all this? In other words, what do you see going forward in terms of what your members are going to do to kind of navigate through what we're seeing?
First, immediately, is we are using what is not insignificant, proven to be not insignificant political clout. We had the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, as you know, 3 years ago. And, I have to say, all the ocean carriers opposed it and so forth, but agriculture exporters supported it, and members of Congress from every state, Republican and Democrat, they all like their farmers, it seems. And in California, we actually had Congressman Garamendi, a Democrat, jointly with Congressman Johnson from South Dakota. They jointly introduced legislation and drove that right through Congress. It passed the House of Representatives 3 times overwhelmingly. The Senate, they didn't even count the votes. It was a voice vote because everybody on Capitol Hill, while there are major importers that are the base and revenue for the ocean carriers, they need that, and we need them. We need all that import volume that comes in. That's what brings the carriers to bring the containers here. the exporters need those containers, and we need the importers to bring them in. But on Capitol Hill, they really care about their agriculture, their farmers, their manufacturers, anybody that's building, growing, manufacturing here in the United States and exporting. So we are weighing in already with every senator, California or South Dakota, Democrat or Republican, makes no difference. Our issues are completely bipartisan. In fact, I would say further, nonpartisan. Everybody is on board, as we saw with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. So they need to weigh in with the White House, and they are. The new Secretary of Agriculture certainly is on the hot seat and trying to drive this through. She did not expect to be in position for less than a month and have to go to the White House and explain this thing to the president, but she is. And so that's the first thing we're doing everywhere. Governors, senators, congresspeople, and so forth. At the same time, we're trying to explain to the foreign customers that this administration has shown that sometimes it will threaten in order to gain some objective, but then not actually impose the threatened tariffs. And that's been happening for the last month and a half, as you know. So that's another. And then, of course, you're looking as hard as you can for other people who want to buy our agricultural products.
Yeah. Well, you know, if we go back to the previous period of the tariff implementation, I'm going back to 2018, 2019. So we've kind of lived that transition. That is, when I say we, the ports, the exporters, the importers. So what are the lessons learned from the first time we went through this dynamic as we see it today?
The first is not go jump off the highest floor, off the roof, because sometimes these things change. The other thing is we have learned that we have to be competitor in agriculture, but I think it's true for ports and everything else in our commerce. We can't assume that just because we've had the business, we're going to keep the business. And I know you are continuously working to increase efficiency here at the port, handle more volume, so we don't have the problems we had during COVID, and those things. You're driving those things, and the new bridges and all the stuff you've got going on here. That's what you're doing for the ports. Agriculture is the same thing. We're becoming more efficient, more niche, if you will. We might cede to Brazil kind of volume, but not because they're not matching our quality. And I'm not just saying this because their agriculture is our members, but if you want, quality almonds in volume, you can't get them outside the United States and outside of California. Our beef export, Brazil is certainly meeting us, matching us in volume, but on quality, people are still coming here. So, we're shifting a little bit to assure that we control the global market for quality, not just volume.
So Peter, AgTC, and through your leadership, you've been in the forefront of making sure that we accelerate and the whole question of our exports, U.S. exports. And when I say accelerate, I'm not talking just about speed, but in numbers.
Yeah.
Increase our export market. Yeah. Every administration has had some roadmap to do that. When I was in Washington as chairman of the FMC, the Obama administration, as you recall, had the National Export Initiative. Now that we are in 2025 in the environment that we are in, but tariffs set aside, what do you think we need to do as a nation to really increase exports here in the United States, be it ag grain, which I think it's within your venue of expertise, but just exports overall? What should we do as a country?
Well, first of all, we have to avoid self-inflicted wounds. When you were chair There was a proposal in the industry for verified gross mass. You remember that? It was a ridiculous idea that we would add more paperwork and more delay and every container moving through every port. And, you know, you were chairman of the committee. You got the Coast Guard involved, you got others involved, and it was by consensus, which you led, and we're very grateful for that. Carriers backed off of it. It was a bad idea. They realized it was a bad idea. The Coast Guard told them, but the FMC told them, and you kind of brought people together. So that was very helpful. So that was a self-inflicted wound we would have suffered. This Chinese ship limitation is a self-inflicted wound. I mean, I thought the idea was to impose sanctions on other countries, not put sanctions on ourselves, which is what this thing does. Now, how do we, you know, what's the plan for exports? We have to reduce some of the additional expenses. You know, when we prohibit diesel trucks, and I know it's a challenge all over the country. People want different technology. They want zero emission and all that. You have to make sure that the product that is, I hate to say it with agriculture people, low value, but compared to athletic footwear and you know, silk ties and so forth, soybeans are relatively low value. So are bales of cotton. We've got to be able to move those efficiently. We are improving the process with inland loading ports, with better rail connections. We've got to have all the transport to the ports become more efficient. More loading points in places they're needed, in inland locations, as well as the routes need to be moving through clearly. We need to have the highways have the capability, and we have to have the ports be able to move the cargo through efficiently. And you have some very good terminals here at Port of Long Beach, and they're the terminals of choice for exporters. If we can multiply those around the country, we can be more efficient, lower cost, faster to market. We have some product, and you can be pretty proud of this, actually, we can. If you're moving a pork or beef to Korea, chilled, not frozen, chilled, can you imagine how fast that has to move from Arkansas and Kansas by truck to cold storage, to a railroad, to the West Coast port, to cold storage, or if it's not by railroad, because sometimes the trucks are faster, even from the Midwest, two-person truck driving teams. They bring it here, they put it on through your port, put it on the ship, it's got to go to Korea, and it's still got to have a week of fresh time in the supermarkets in Korea. If there's any glitch along the way, the only thing that can be done, whether it's in Arkansas or Kansas, they get the messages that the temperature is going up or the thing is delayed, they turn the temperature down and freeze it. And then it goes over, it's delivered frozen. Well, the grocery store didn't want it frozen, they wanted fresh meat. The value of that shipment over there has now dropped 70%. They lose 70%. So Tyson or whoever it is that's shipping through, if that doesn't move quickly, it's slowed down along the way. Can you imagine they've lost 70% of the value of that and what they're going to get? And when you lose 70%, that means you've suffered a loss of the whole product. It's been a loss. So then you lose reputation and so forth. And there are a couple West Coast ports, you're one, that can actually be moving through that fast, consistently. But that's the sort of thing we need to have regularly happen. It can't be an exception. It has to be dependable. You move it that fast. And the way you achieve that is remove the roadblocks, if you will, on the inland distribution.
Well, I agree with you 100%. You know, for the Port of Long Beach, well, first of all, you mentioned cold storage. Now, that's a whole subject altogether that maybe on a part two, we'll talk more in more detail about that. But just to let you know, for the Port of Long Beach, that's the reason we're investing heavily on rail, because California is big on grain and agriculture.
Yes, sir.
Number one, a lot of people don't know that, but part of the reason we're the fifth greatest economy in California is international trade,
Yep.
or a major reason, and of course our ag commodities.
Yes.
And for that reason, part of our vision in terms of amplifying rail is to further the export capability on rail, particularly through Central California down to the San Pedro Bay complex. And you know about our Pier B Rail Enhancement Facility. I'm sure you heard from Katie Farmer yesterday here at the TPM on the topic, from BNSF, on the topic of the big project, Barstow International Gateway.
Yes.
The terminal there would be the largest intermodal facility in the country. So we're very excited here
Yes.
about the Pier B, the BNSF project, to really talk about the connectivity that you are referencing, more particularly for the exporter. So, Peter, let me ask you one last question. And I had to ask this question because while I was at the FMC, you introduced me to AgTC, that is in-person meetings and all that we went through. And I was really impressed with your membership. And I never would have thought back then that we were going to have anytime soon a visit to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And I would have to say, I think everybody knows that you led that call. And as you mentioned, it was a bipartisan effort to move to amend the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. So let me ask you, what has come from that in terms of the benefits that you have seen as a result of that? And what do you think is next?
The challenge during COVID, which really was a stimulus, if you will, for OSTRA, was very frankly detention and demurrage charges. Now, detention and demurrage charges come about when the system isn't working as fluidly as it should. If the containers are, getting to the port at the right time, if they're getting on the ship at the right time and that ship is going out, well, there's not going to be any charges. If the container's coming in, move through the terminal and in to the commerce, there's not going to be any charges. But we had, during COVID, massive detention demurrage charges at all ports around the country, or Canada, you name it. And those massive charges were debilitating. I mean, in most cases, more than the actual freight rates. So we need to get some reform on that. And that's what OSTRA did. We've got reform on it. Those charges are no longer that way. And the ocean carriers have reformed their own systems to actually avoid creating situations where you have these detention demurrage charges resulting from delays on the terminal. And they have reformed their own systems in customer relations, if you will, able to hear from their customers, what the problem is and resolve the problems. And, some of those sound like simple things like answering the phone, but that's one of the things that we needed an act of Congress to tell a carrier to answer the phone when a customer has a problem. But those things have helped greatly. They have helped greatly. I think we're going to need those reforms to continue. But they have helped tremendously.
Well, thank you, Peter. I want to thank AgTC and, of course, your leadership in terms of the continuing drive to assist and represent the American exporter, because that's a very key component to international trade. So again, as we move forward, I think in June, you're going to have your annual AgTC conference in Tacoma. I look forward to being there and continuing the conversation. So with that, thank you again, Peter, for joining us today. I think you've helped us again have a better understanding with respect to the agriculture industry for this country and why it's beneficial for us to really focus on how we increase efficiencies and further the export market. So again, thank you for coming to the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Choice, the Green Port, and stay tuned for the next update. Thank you.